Lieutenant Governor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Craig. It's good to be here.
Let's start big picture. Get a sense of where you line up. Who did you vote for in the presidential preference primary?
Well, I was supporting Marco Rubio.
And give him a score of 1 to 10 in terms of how he's performed in the U.S. Senate.
10.
What could you do that would be better than Marco Rubio if you give him a 10?
Well, I'd rather not put it in those terms. I prefer to talk about how I would approach being Florida's senator, what I think the needs of our country and our state are, and why I'm running.
You've served as lieutenant governor for a while. Florida went without one for about 10 months. Knowing what you know in the job, is that an essential job that Florida needs, or could the state get by okay and save $124,000 a year without one?
Well, it's in the state constitution. Previous lieutenant governors or any other person in this office could use the office to grow their profile and use it for political reasons. I've actually cut the budget of the office by more than half, reduced the staff, because I recognize that taxpayer money, somebody has to pay those taxes for it. I'm also the only lieutenant governor to not ever take a security detail, which is an additional cost on the taxpayers. That's not necessary, and I don't have one.
Would you support wiping out the position entirely?
I think that's up to the voters. They're the ones that created it. They'd have to be the ones to decide.
If this came up on the ballot and you had a vote, which way would you vote?
I don't know. Ask me if it's on the ballot.
Okay, we'll ask you if it's on the ballot. Your critics will say that it's a position that only official duty is whether or not the governor is incapacitated or dead. You check out and find out he's okay, your job is done. Tell us what you have done as lieutenant governor to move the ball.
Well, I've been an integral part of the team. I mean, it's a team effort to cut taxes 55 times, create an environment where over 1,061,000 jobs have been created in Florida, where 600,000 people have moved to. It is a constant effort to ensure that our state is continuing to create more opportunities. And if you look at the rest of the country, there's many other states that are not doing nearly as well as Florida is. And it's because we have stayed true to our principles of less taxes and less government and more freedom for the citizens to make decisions for themselves, their businesses, and their families.
And when you were a state lawmaker, though, you voted to raise taxes during the recession. Put that in context for us.
I actually, as a state lawmaker, as a freshman, I was able to pass a constitutional amendment to cut property taxes for low-income seniors, to make it easier for you to appeal the value of your property tax bill, to create a level playing field when you're appealing the values and take the presumption of correctness away from the property appraiser and create fairness for the property owner. I have a whole career of actually delivering accomplishments to lower property taxes, toughest mortgage fraud laws in the history of the nation and the state. I passed them, and that was a response to the mortgage fraud crisis we were having here in Florida. Washington, D.C. gave us Dodd-Frank, 2,300 pages. My response was 3 pages long. It said, if you commit mortgage fraud from the notary public to the mortgage broker, anyone involved, it's a second-degree felony.
And to the time that you voted to increase taxes under the Crist administration, why did you vote that way?
Well, Charlie Crist put us in an impossible situation, and we now know that Charlie Crist was not the best thing for Florida, and the voters have actually had the opportunity to make that decision and send a message. I'm thankful that I was able to work with Governor Scott and undo those increase of costs in 2014.
If you had a do-over, would you have voted against that tax increase under
Well,
Crist?
hindsight is always 20/20, Craig. And I'm just happy that I was able to be a part of undoing and cutting taxes, actually $1.5 billion since I took on the job as lieutenant governor.
Now, there's a kind of a funny moment when you were criticizing Charlie Crist on camera in South Florida, and then Charlie Crist walked up right behind you, patted you on the back, or shook your hand. What was going through your head in that moment?
I don't know. That was a couple years ago. I do know that we've come to expect those kinds of things from Charlie Crist. I think that's why the voters have repeatedly not given him the opportunity to serve in public office again, because they recognize that he's in it for himself.
In general, are the people of Florida still overtaxed?
No, we're one of the, if not the lowest tax state.
But I said in general, I'm talking about Washington, federal taxes as well.
Oh, absolutely. And, I encounter people on a daily basis who say, I'd be okay with paying the taxes if I felt confident they were being spent appropriately. The problem is that Washington now has the highest amount of revenue they've ever had, trillions of dollars, yet we're still deficit spending. We're still adding to the debt every year. And we still don't have accountability throughout a wide range of programs in the federal government. There's so much waste and bureaucracy. It's It's burdensome and it's overwhelming.
And give us specifics in terms of waste. Where would you cut? In terms of taxes, federal taxes, where would you cut?
One thing I'd like to do, since Dodd-Frank has made it more difficult for community banks to exist and survive, and they're being gobbled up and bought out by the larger banks, it makes it more difficult for small businesses to access capital, to get the funds to start a business, grow a business, expand a business. So I would like to lower and target the capital gains tax towards businesses that have 100 employees or less. Lower that capital gains tax and create an incentive for people to invest their capital in small businesses. They'll pay less taxes on the returns. Small businesses will have a new source of revenue and capital to grow their businesses, and it'll work to grow the economy.
Looking back on the governor's campaign, your campaign with him and the one before in his administration thus far, do you have any regrets?
Regrets, I wish we would have cut taxes even more. Although we were able to keep our promise. And during the 2014 campaign, we committed to cut taxes $1 billion in the first 2 years of the new term. As of this last session, we kept our word on that promise, and we've cut taxes just over $1 billion. I would have liked to have cut more.
What about the governor's promise to bring an Arizona-style immigration law to Florida? Do you wish he had not promised that?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the governor.
But I'm asking you, do you support that? Do you support an Arizona-style immigration law in Florida?
I think the whole issue of immigration has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. It's now a national security issue. I was with the lieutenant governor of Texas just last week. He was telling me that they just appropriated $800 million for border patrol along their southern border because the federal government has failed them. And they have caught some very nefarious characters crossing the border that they hand over to the federal government and then have no idea what happens from there. It is a serious issue that now affects the safety and security of the citizens, not only of southwest parts of this country, but the entire country, because we have people from around the world who have made it very clear that their goal is to do us harm, that they hate our way of life, and they want to do everything possible to damage it. And they are finding ways, whatever creative way they can, to get in this country and commit horrible acts like we saw in San Bernardino. You've seen it in Brussels. You've seen it in Paris. This is a dangerous new world, and we need to recognize that. And part of that is ensuring that we secure our borders and we do not allow anybody, not one person, who seeks to do us harm into this country.
Where do you stand on Donald Trump's call to build this massive wall?
Well, I think a wall will be part of the equation, but we have technology that allows us to read the headlines of the Wall Street Journal from space. We should use our intelligence capabilities that we use to protect us around the world and use it to protect our borders as well. We also have to have an E-Verify system to ensure that that the draw of employment is no longer the case, by ensuring that those who are hiring are checking the status of those who they hire.
You would be but one voice out of 100 in the Senate if elected. This Senate has been highly dysfunctional. What could our Lieutenant Governor bring to the table in Washington that the 100 in office, including the fellow you give a 10 out of 10 today, cannot, in terms of moving legislation? We've been gridlocked on this for some time.
Well, it'd be very easy for anyone to give up, but I'm not the kind of person that gives up. I would go into this with eyes wide open. There are ways to get things done. There are ways to compromise without compromising one's principles. You can disagree without being disagreeable. I was able to do it in Tallahassee. I was able to get a constitutional amendment to cut property taxes for seniors in my first term as a state house member. And it's not something that happens regularly, but it goes back to the experiences that I gained in private life, in business, in real estate development. Common sense is what is lacking, especially in Washington, D.C. There is such an echo chamber up there of people who have been there so long that they have no idea what the real world is like anymore, because they haven't been in the real world for decades and decades, and the economy and the world and the way people do business has passed them by. I mean, there are people who became members of Congress or members of the United States Senate when we were still using rotary telephones. And now we're on iPhones, and it's a totally different world. They have no idea. It's to them, the plight of a small business person is something that is handed to them because it's been focus grouped and poll tested. Well, I've been there. I've actually suffered at the hands of government bureaucrats. I've risked capital. I know what it is to take a risk to try and make something happen and not be successful at it and be successful at it. And that is the type of perspective that I have taken throughout the time that I was in the legislature, or even now as lieutenant governor when I was property appraiser in Dade County. And that's why I've always sought to deliver results, because that's what we're not getting from DC, results.
And to get things done, you have to work across the aisle. And though you disagree with members of the other party, you still have to respect them, do you not?
Well, we're all American citizens, are we not, Craig?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
One of the beautiful things about this country is the First Amendment. We have the ability to publicly disagree, not only with each other, but with our leaders. And that is something that I never forget. And because my family came from a country that right now, that is not allowed. You are actually beaten, arrested, and thrown in jail if you speak out and you disagree with your leadership.
Knowing what you know, give me some examples of Democrats in the Senate today, or maybe just in Washington in general, who I'm sure you would disagree with, but you respect and think you could work with.
Well, you know, I'm not a big follower of who's doing what in Washington, D.C. I'm not a Washington, D.C. guy. I can tell you the Democrats that I've worked with in Tallahassee.
Sure, give me an example of Tallahassee.
I was able to get policy to extend an affordable housing program while lowering taxes and funding the Everglades, and I did it with a Democrat state senator named Dan Gelber.
All right, let's move on to your time as lieutenant governor and the governor's administration. We were talking about regrets a little earlier. What about the governor's decision to cut public education in the first part of his first term? Is that something you regret?
I don't regret that we didn't raise taxes.
Right.
Because, you know, too often in government, you have people who believe that it's government's money that it spends.
Should we have cut funding for public education when we did at that time? And
well,
by that much?
We had to cut. I mean, we were in the middle of a recession. We were facing multi-billion-dollar shortfalls in our state budget. The only alternative was to raise taxes. And we were elected to not raise taxes. So we did what we were elected to do. Now, if you look at the outcomes, you look at the states that did raise taxes, and you look at the state like Florida that did not, we are in much better position economically and as far as opportunities than any of those other states. They're still facing shortfalls in their budgets. They're still facing higher unemployment rate numbers than we are. We made the tough decisions, which is another thing that is lacking in Washington, D.C. Too many people are focused with getting reelected and what can I do to ensure that I'm safe in my next reelection? And instead of being focused on the next reelection, they should be focused on the next generation and stop kicking the can down the road and stop procrastinating. That's why we have nearly $20 trillion in debt. That's why we have people who are moving jobs overseas because it is less competitive to do it here in the United States of America. We got to get this turned around, because if not, I don't even want to think about what the future will hold.
So tough decision, but cutting public education at that time was the right way to go.
Well, is the earth still spinning, Craig?
Yes.
You know, people still driving and going to work, and everybody's still, you know, surviving, right?
Yes.
Then it worked. And now we have a 4.9% unemployment rate, the lowest it's been in 8 years. We have higher graduation rates for minorities, higher graduation rates for students in Florida, better outcomes, better performance. It's not always about how much you spend. Maybe it's about how you spend it.
I want to get to know you personally a little bit. What is the last book that you read?
A Land Remembered. It's a book about Florida, and it's an amalgamation of the big families, the cattle, the citrus families that helped settle this state and grow this state at the turn of the century through the 1960s. It's a great story about Florida, told through through one particular family called the McIvies and their struggles in settling in the state and to growing into a very wealthy family. It's a great book.
All right, favorite author, favorite movie, favorite song?
Well, I have to say Land Remembered is one of my favorite books, so Patrick Smith is the author of that. I'm also a fan of Ernest Hemingway, and more recently Arthur Brooks, who wrote A Conservative Heart, which is a great book as well.
Final question. Why are you doing this now? If you're this upset with Washington politics, and you know you'd just be one voice out of 100, and you know the gridlock that has existed there for years, why would you want to be a Washington politician?
Well, you know, there's a difference between wanting to be a Washington politician, which I don't want to be. It's specifically why I'm running, because we have too many Washington politicians. I'm a Florida Republican. Here we have done what we said we were going to do, and we delivered on our promises, and the outcomes show that they're working. That's the problem with Washington, D.C. We get a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blame, a lot of red meat talking points, but no deliverables. I want to go up there and deliver. Now, I also want to be present. I'm the only person who's running this race, and frankly, I still don't understand why, who has committed to have monthly town hall meetings in Florida and be present and listen to those whom I represent. I'm the only one who's talking about Florida issues and knows the state and who's been from Escambia County to Monroe County. Florida is a great state. It's the third largest state, and its voice needs to be heard as far as its own particular issues. And the reason I'm doing it now is because we are at a crossroads in our nation's history. We can go one way and become just like any other country in Europe, where government is the answer to everything, or we can get back on the path of what our founding fathers intended, which is a land of opportunity, where we are all endowed with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I want to ensure that people have the ability to pursue their happiness here in Florida and in the United States of America for generations to come.
Lieutenant Governor Carlos Lopez-Cantera, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate it.